Chapter 3.6, the Renaissance, Part 6. This really is Part 6. I think I said Part 6 on 5. All right, so we're going to get into the Baroque era a little bit further, and we're going to end here pretty soon. We are looking at this beautiful little church in Rome. A lot of things were getting built at this time, end of the Renaissance. They've resolved a lot of structural issues, engineering. A lot of discoveries have been made during the Renaissance, and we're continuing on here. But we're not as interested in symmetry, and we're not as interested in geometry and hard edges. We start to get into curves quite a bit. The Baroque era precedes Rococo, which takes it even a step further, which we'll see, but it's very ornate, lots of decoration on the exterior. And this is the facade was added, there's even more things added to it later. So this is our floor plan. Oh my goodness, what happened? Where did our cross plan go? Where did our basilica go? Where did our symmetry go? It's gone. So the Baroque church, for one thing, it's quite a bit smaller. But it doesn't have that sense of organizing principle. It's curved and rounded, and it's more intimate. So ornate decorations and irregular shapes and so on. And light is emphasized through windows and painted frescoes. We don't get to look inside in this book, but you can look that up. Okay, we're going to get into the three Davids, early Renaissance with Donatello, and then we get into the high Renaissance with Michelangelo, and then we get into the Baroque with Bernini. Okay, 1430. Our David here, now this is astonishing and historic in many ways, but one of the most significant things is this is the first full-scale bronze to be cast since the Roman era. I don't exactly know what year, but it's over 1,000 years at this point have gone by without bronze casting. That's mind-boggling when you think about it. Carving probably always happened. You can kind of figure that out if you lost, the masters died out and they had no students or something like that. But you have to know what you're doing with bronze casting. It's a little complicated when you have metal that's, almost 2,000 degrees or right around there, molten metal rolling around. You have to know what you're doing. So anyway, he figures this out, and he does this 5-foot-high bronze, quite an achievement. Nothing like this since the Roman era. He's got the contrapposto Greek stance, so this is the early Renaissance, so he's bringing it into the Greco-Roman ideals. He's nude. He's a young boy. Now, this is the only young boy we see out of the three Davids we're going to look at depicted, and in the Bible, supposedly he really truly was a young boy, and he defeated Goliath, whose head we have down here. So our point in the action is after the fact. He has slain him, and he has chopped his head off. This is Goliath's sword. He has taken his head, and he's standing on it victorious. This also, by the way, is a classic stance, and you'll see that in sculpture, but that you used to just step on your enemy's head to show victory. A bit grim for us these days, but that's what people used to do. So this is early Renaissance and classical idealized nudes. Then we get into Michelangelo, who studied, Donatello's piece. Absolutely stunning. More of a mature male, strong, not looking like as much of an underdog as Donatello's. We are about 70 years later, 70 years later, 14 feet high. Almost 3 times as high as that other piece. We're carving in marble. I mean, really, when you think about how hard it is to carve something out of a single block of stone, which if you see kind of the remnants of the edges of that stone, it was a massive amount of stone to carve away. Think about how much was carved away and how perfect this body is. There's no cracks. It's just stunningly gorgeous. You see the veins on the hand. It's amazing. His is in the pose of pre-slingshot. He's thinking it over. Maybe Goliath is not on the scene yet. He's calmly waiting for the action to happen, but this is a little bit more classical of the Greek nudes in a contemplative pose. He's not really too active. Then we get into, oh, and also that slightly noticeable slingshot, that lends to him being more of an everyman or being more identifiable with other stories, not just David. He's a hero, he's a generic hero, if that makes sense. We get into Bernini, and this is such an interesting piece of marble. It has these sort of black flecks in it. But this David is thoroughly in the action. He is flinging that slingshot. He is just on the moment of impact. He has his bag here, probably full of rocks, but he is just about to let go of that thing. All that musculature is poised and ready. Lots of action and activity happening, and very difficult way to sculpt. And he creates this sort of like piece of armor or something that he's sort of attached to, and some drapery. Not so much about modesty, but really having to do with just holding up that figure in this pose. That is not a lot of contact area there for all this weight of this stone. So impressive, gorgeous, stunning. Oh, and it's probably a self-portrait. We're not sure. Viewed in the round, you walk around this piece. It's not frontal like the other two. Dun dun dun. Isn't that amazing? This is more life-size as well. This is 5'7", 5'2", 14'7", and 5'7". Just absolutely stunning. So you can compare and contrast here with our poses. Donatello breaks new ground, but not quite to the standards of high Renaissance. And of course, with Michelangelo, he loves the male form, and he really gets all these muscles into his sculptures and his paintings. Sistine Chapel's got some pretty muscular saints and so on in there that likely were never that built up, but he shows all the detail. Then Bernini gets into this twisted, dynamic, diagonal here. All right, drama, grandeur, tenebrism. Remember, tenebrism is the heavy value shift. Chiaroscuro is the value shift on like an arm and leg or whatever, a three-dimensional object to make it more three-dimensional. But tenebrism is more high contrast to create a focal point. So they're kind of similar, but they're not the same. Make sure you don't try to swap those out. All right, so Northern Baroque painters are looking into non-religious subject matter and landscape, still lifes, and genre scenes. Genre scene, that sounds like, okay, this means multitude of things. That means more daily life or just a slice of life kind of thing. So your common people, still lives, that kind of thing. This is Peter Klaas. I don't really know how to say that. But this is a German piece, and it's a Vanitas, which I feel like this image is blurry, but it could just be, I don't know, a low res image. And I'm a little confused here. But this is a Vanitas piece, and this is showing the passing of life. We have our skull here, which shows death, and there's usually like a timepiece depicted, and this like water is spilled or wine is spilled. Time flies, and here's a mirror with a figure in it. You know how the Northern Europeans love that reflective mirror. Van Eyck did this, and so on, so that you can see the actual artist. But a Vanitas is like a memento mori. We all die, and you should not forget that and be too materialistic. Oh my goodness, Rubens, height of the Baroque. Doesn't get any more Baroque than this. Rubens and Rembrandt are our two Baroque masters. There are others, but those are the two biggies. Now look at all this twisting and gyrating and oh my gosh, getting Christ on the cross. This is the cross being raised. So raising the Christ, not a very humorous scene, I beg your pardon. But he's up on this cross. There's a lot of musculature. And look how fleshy and lively Christ looks. And quite honestly, he could be near death at this point and very frail and thin. But Rubens just puts all this poundage on him and makes him look really buff. This elbow is coming right at us. It's almost popping past the picture plane. It's really right in our face. So there's not as much of depth of field, and there's no perspective per se. It's not like out of proportion and distorted. It's just that the focus is really up into our face, and it's emotional, and it's overwrought and dramatic. Rubens, oh yeah, he cranked out 2,000 paintings. That's just astonishing. He had a huge workshop. I don't know how many assistants, but he could have had a couple dozen even. Most artists working today or any time through history that accomplish either very large works or complex works or many works, they have assistants. This is a traditional apprenticeship type situation, and probably anybody that you know of or ever have heard of before you read this book, likely they have about 12 people or so working for them. Not everybody, but generally speaking, the big names have workshops. So in his case in Antwerp, he had many assistants. He would do some of the personal, more VIP kind of commissions himself, but he cranked out a lot of paintings. Okay, so we had our strong diagonal lines, and the immaculate flesh is bathed in light and emphasizes his holiness. Also, the strength of the church, that could be another reason. Rembrandt, this piece here was called the Night Watch. I mean, it's still, it's in parentheses now. It was cleaned. This is one of those stories of, the questions of varnishing and so on. But this got really filthy, and it was cleaned around after World War II. But anyway, all this detail got revealed because a lot of these characters, there was a lot of the stuff that disappeared. I don't have a before and after for you. But they were like, oh my gosh, there's a window. Oh, it's daylight. They had no idea because they thought these were people assembling, militia assembling to go out on a night watch for some kind of threat to them or something like that, but it's actually a daytime painting. It's indoors, but it's a daytime painting. But Rembrandt is Mr. Dark and Light, right? He's got these dark darks here, these bright brights, our tenebrism at a high scale, dramatic scene, lots of diagonals and things happening here. Dog barking, somebody's beating a drum. It's noisy, it's messy, it's emotional. Now, these are more of the common people. It's not a religious scene, and more than likely, these are all real portraits of people, and he would get a little bit of cash from the folks that were in this militia. It's an innovative group portrait. This is one of the first that really embodies a historical portrait that embodies a lot of people, but this is commemorating the Medici, Queen Marie de Medici to Amsterdam, but it's also commemorating those people because they paid for it, if that makes sense. We have chiaroscuro, tenebrism, dramatic lighting, and it was believed to be a night scene until it was cleaned. So that's one of those funny little stories. Poussin, funeral of Phocion in 1648. So this is an oil on canvas, and again, we are dealing with oil on canvas at this point. Let's back up. Oil on panel for Rubens, all right? So he's doing this one on a piece of board, small. This is only 15 inches high. When we want to get big, we're going to go to canvas. So this is 11 feet high by 14 feet wide. So this is inches, and that's feet. That's massive, okay? All right, so we are 4 feet by, I forget what 68 inches would be. Over 6 feet, I believe. What is it? 5 feet is, I think that's 5'8". Okay, so we're got this massive scene. We're winding and winding into the background, and we haven't seen this in a little while in the Baroque, but it does go on. We get some depth of field, but this is this idea that Phocion, he was thought to be a traitor, and he's got to be outside of city limits. He can't be buried within the walls. But this is more of a classical Greek scene, and he's showing some depth of field here that is still kind of hearkening to the Renaissance, but it's, a landscape. It's got some richness here. It's more ornate. Specialized subjects and it's carefully constructed composition. Okay, here we go. This is our embodiment, you might say, in a personage of the Baroque. And his lineage, his family, this is Louis the 14th. We get to Louis the 16th. Around that time, his son and grandson get into the Rococo. But the Baroque is still over the top, and it's decorative, it's lavish, and so on. This is ermine. Now that's a kind of a little weasel that's the most expensive, more than mink, rarer than mink. Ermine is white with these little black flecks. That shows royalty. Blue also shows royalty. Gold shows royalty. And that's the fleur de lis, the lily flower. And that is what is on the French garments to show royalty. So that would be his emblem. He invented high heels, by the way. Do you just love it? And look at those legs. So he was over 60 at this point, but it was very common to depict a king in his best self and his younger self, right? And then all this drapery and frippery and so on. And look at his hair, all that amazing hair showing his legs off. I mean, vanity, right? Okay, so he's showing off his legs. I love it. Okay, here we are in the Hall of Mirrors in Versailles. Versailles had previously been a hunting lodge. Well, look at it now. Henry the 14th, or sorry, not Henry, Louis the 14th, beg your pardon. He moves from Paris, where the Louvre is now. That was the palace of the king in France prior. He moves out to Versailles for an increased control over his people because he felt like there was too much double dealing and nonsense going on in Paris. Now I'm simplifying, but basically Versailles becomes the seat of power, and he spends money like crazy and constructing all these different rooms. And in this particular case, this is the famous Hall of Mirrors. There's mirrors all over here. Now we think about mirrors today, we just think go to Walmart, no big deal. Well, mirrors were not easy to make. To get them to be shiny and the glass to cure just so it reflected anything at all. It could have been milky or messy. And this is all blown. The glass, window glass, even in the 20th century, was blown, hand blown, like a tube, like a cylindrical form, and then flattened, right? With mirror, you have to have silver backing. It has to be just the right temperature and all that. So it's very fussy, very expensive, and it shows as a sign of wealth. But because of the window light reflecting off these mirrors, and then all the chandeliers and these other light fixtures, that is making this room full of light. And he is the Sun King. The sun rises and sets with him, so anything with light and sun has to do with him. All these ornate paintings, all along here, lots of gold leaf and bronze, and just ornate marble here, just stunning, stunning, stunning. So this is commissioned by him. He greets dignitaries here for formal celebrations, and it reflects the gardens of Versailles. The gardens are quite stunning. And that's the Baroque.